After 3 years of sacrifice, my husband's father, the boss, gave the promotion to his niece, who'd only been there 8 weeks. The words echoed in my mind like a distant drum, each beat reverberating with disbelief. My heart sank, and yet, in the pit of my stomach, I knew this day was coming. I had worked tirelessly for years, dedicated everything to this company, to my family, and most importantly, to the belief that my hard work would be recognized. But that belief was shattered in an instant. I had always known that in this world, loyalty and dedication are often overlooked in favor of favoritism and connections. But I had hoped, no, I had believed, that this time, things would be different. But here I was, sitting across from my father-in-law, watching him hand over the promotion to someone who barely knew the ins and outs of the company, someone who had done nothing but show up for a few weeks. I had put in late nights, sacrificed weekends, missed family events, all for this moment that was supposed to be mine. And now, in a single instant, it was stolen from me. My own husband's family, the ones who should have supported me, had taken everything I had worked for and handed it to someone else, without a second thought. I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks as the realization settled in. But I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply sat there, staring at the papers on the desk in front of me. My resignation letter was already in my hand, ready to be presented. With a deep breath, I smiled. The calmness I felt wasn't just for show, it was the quiet strength that had been building inside me for years, unnoticed by everyone around me. This was it. The moment that would change everything. The moment I would take back control of my life. "Congrats to Lily," I said softly, my voice steady but full of meaning. I watched my father-in-law's face flush as he processed my words. He didn't expect it. He didn't expect me to walk away. To let go of something that had once felt like my future. As I stood to leave, I placed the resignation letter on the table in front of him. The silence in the room was deafening. But I didn't feel the need to speak further. I didn't need to explain myself. Actions spoke louder than words. And as I walked out of that office, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders. I had taken the first step towards something new. Something better. And they wouldn't even see it coming. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me and sharing these stories that matter. If you believe that loyalty should be valued over family politics in the workplace, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now, let's see how this unfolds. The next morning, everything seemed oddly normal. The air was crisp as I stepped out of bed, the sound of the birds outside mingling with the hum of the coffee machine. The coffee was brewing just like any other day, yet nothing felt the same. The world outside, the one I had so carefully crafted, was suddenly shifting beneath my feet. Julian came into the kitchen, looking as confident as ever. He didn't know yet. He didn't know that the decisions he had made, or rather the ones his family had made for us, had pushed me to a breaking point. He kissed me on the forehead, smiling with his usual charm. "Morning, babe. You good?" I nodded, but I wasn't. His words were just like his touch, mechanical, as if nothing had changed. But the truth was, everything had changed. The promotion he had taken for granted was now in the hands of someone who had not earned it. And I had to make sure that I wouldn't let his family's betrayal define me. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't going to show him that. Instead, I was calm in a way he couldn't understand. I had seen this coming long before it happened. I had spent years building a life that revolved around his success, his power, his image. But where had it left me? Nowhere. So, when he casually mentioned how he was the company's golden child, how his father relied on him, how he was going to take over everything soon, I felt a coldness settle in my chest. I had played my part in his success, quietly supporting him, sacrificing everything for this moment. But for the first time in years, I realized how little I mattered in his eyes. "I'm glad things are moving forward for you," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the disappointment I felt inside. He was too caught up in his own world to see that everything was changing. And this change was not something I could turn back from. I didn't react the way he expected me to. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply sat there, in the calmness of the morning, feeling the weight of my decisions settle within me. I had already made up my mind. I was done. He went on about the company's future, about how this promotion meant everything for his career. I tuned him out, focusing instead on the sound of my heartbeat. The pounding of my heart wasn't from anger, it was from a sense of clarity, the kind of clarity you get when you realize the only person you need to prove something to is yourself. You know, he said, leaning on the kitchen counter, still unaware of the storm brewing inside me, Dad wants me to handle more of the company now. Guess he finally realized who the real backbone is. I let out a soft, almost imperceptible chuckle. Yeah, guess so. But inside, I wasn't just reacting to his words. I was preparing for something bigger. Something better. This was no longer about his success, his rise to the top, it was about mine. And it was going to be done on my terms. As he left for work, I stayed behind, the weight of the day ahead hanging over me. But this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like liberation. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. And he wouldn't even see it coming. The next few days passed in a blur. I went through the motions of daily life, going to work, smiling at the people around me, pretending everything was okay. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't the same woman anymore. The calm I had felt when I handed in my resignation was now replacing my every thought. For the first time in years, I was truly free. It was strange, the feeling of freedom that came with walking away from something I had invested so much of myself in. I had spent so many years waiting for someone else to acknowledge my worth, to give me the validation I deserved. But now, the truth was clear, I didn't need anyone's approval. I walked into my office on Monday morning with a new sense of purpose. My boss was still there, but for the first time, I didn't feel small next to him. He had always been the one in control, the one calling the shots. But not anymore. Today, I would show him, and the world, that I was in control of my own destiny. As I sat at my desk, I glanced at the resignation letter on my computer screen. It was the same letter I had handed over to Julian's father, the one that had changed everything. I remembered the way my father-in-law had looked at me when I walked out of that meeting, as if I had betrayed him. But I hadn't. I had only taken back what was mine. I pulled up the files I had been working on for months, the ones I had kept hidden from Julian. It was time to make my move. Time to show him that he had never truly known me. While he had been busy focusing on his career, I had quietly built my own empire. I had been investing, restructuring, and acquiring shares of the company for months. By the time Julian realized what had happened, it would be too late. I opened the first file and began reviewing the documents. They were all part of the plan I had been working on for months, the plan that would give me the power I had always deserved. The power that Julian had taken for granted. As I went through the numbers, I felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't just about the promotion anymore. This was about creating something that was mine, about proving to myself and everyone else that I was capable of so much more than they had ever imagined. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need Julian's approval. I had already taken the first step in reclaiming my life, and I was never going back. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was Julian. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Hey," he said, his voice sounding calm but uncertain. "I know you're still upset about the promotion, but I'm trying to make things right. I don't want us to fight." I paused, taking a deep breath. This was the moment I had been waiting for. "I'm not upset," I said calmly. "I'm not fighting with you. I'm simply moving on." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the realization hit him. "I'm done, Julian," I continued, my voice steady and strong. "You didn't just take my promotion. You took everything. But now, I'm taking it back." The line went silent. And I knew, right then, that I had won. Not just over him, but over my own fears, doubts, and limitations. I wasn't the woman who had been silenced for years anymore. I was the woman who had found her voice. And nothing, not Julian, not his family, and not anyone else, could ever take that away from me. It was a week later when I walked into the boardroom, feeling a calm certainty that I hadn't felt before. Julian and his father were already sitting at the head of the table, their faces tense and impatient, as though they were preparing for a confrontation. I didn't let their anxiety affect me. Instead, I took my seat at the opposite end, my back straight, my gaze unwavering. The room was silent, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning. I knew they were waiting for me to speak, to explain why I had taken this step, why I had left. But I didn't feel the need to explain myself to them. They had already shown me who they truly were. Now, it was time for them to see who I had become. Julian was the first to speak, his voice thick with tension. You left the company, Violet. You walked away from everything we built together. Now you want to come back, is that it? I looked at him, my expression calm, but there was a fire burning in my chest. I didn't walk away from anything. I took back what was always mine, I replied, my voice steady. I'd been here all along, making the right decisions, taking the right steps. But you, Julian, you were too busy with your own ego to notice. His face darkened with anger, but I could see the uncertainty flickering in his eyes. He was no longer the confident man I had once known. Now, he was nothing more than a shadow of the person I had once admired. You don't understand, Violet, he said, his voice desperate. This company, this family, it was always about us. You were supposed to support me, not undermine me. I took a deep breath, holding my ground. Supporting you meant sacrificing everything that was important to me. Supporting you meant letting you think I was nothing without you. But I've realized that I am everything without you. And I'm not going to hide that anymore. The silence in the room was deafening. Julian's father, who had been sitting quietly, looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and regret. He was the one who had placed his trust in me all those years ago, and now, he saw the consequences of his actions. I should have seen this coming, he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. I stood up, my gaze meeting Julian's for the first time in this conversation. I'm not here for your forgiveness, Julian, I said, my voice firm. I'm here because this company is mine now. I've worked for it, invested in it, and taken it to places you could never have imagined. I'm the one who's going to make sure it thrives. Julian's face turned pale, the reality of my words sinking in. The power had shifted. There was no going back now. I walked out of that room, not just leaving behind my past, but stepping into the future I had built for myself. The future where I was in control, where I was the one who called the shots. And as I looked back one last time, I knew that this was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a chapter where I wasn't just surviving, but thriving. Julian would never understand it, but I didn't need him to. I had already found my power, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it away from me. The days that followed were quiet, almost peaceful. I woke up every morning with a sense of purpose, something I hadn't felt in years. There was no more waiting for recognition, no more hoping that someone would see my worth. I had already proven it to myself. I had taken control, not just of the company, but of my entire life. The first board meeting I led was a turning point. I stood at the head of the table, watching the faces of the men who once thought they had the power to control me. They were all looking at me differently now, no longer as the quiet, obedient wife but as the woman who had taken back what was hers. I spoke with confidence, outlining the changes I planned to implement, the vision I had for the company's future. The men around the table listened, some with admiration, others with disbelief. But none of them spoke over me. They couldn't. The room was no longer theirs, it was mine. Julian's absence was felt, but not in the way I expected. I had spent years worrying about what would happen without him, wondering if I could handle it all on my own. Now, I saw that I had been more than capable of handling it long before he left. It was strange, the feeling of liberation that came with no longer having to rely on anyone else's approval. I was no longer defined by someone else's expectations. I was defined by my own actions, my own decisions. I wasn't just a shadow of who I used to be, I was fully realized, standing tall and proud of everything I had accomplished. The phone rang again that afternoon, the familiar number flashing on the screen. It was Julian. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Violet," he said, his voice quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I want to apologize. I never realized how much you had been carrying." I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but I didn't feel the need to respond right away. I had already forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to release myself from the chains of anger and resentment. "I appreciate your apology," I said finally, my voice calm. "But I've moved on, Julian. I don't need your apology to move forward." He was silent for a moment, the weight of my words sinking in. "I understand," he said softly. "I just want you to know that I'm sorry for everything." I smiled to myself, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about making him feel the pain I had felt. It was about me, about my journey. "I'm glad you understand," I replied. "Now, it's time for us both to move on." We said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. As I sat back in my chair, I realized that I had finally broken free from the past. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had taken my power back, and nothing could take it away from me. The world was mine now. And I was ready to face it, not as someone's wife, but as someone who had earned everything she had, on her own terms. If this story of empowerment and self-discovery moved you, hit the like button right now. What part of Violet's journey inspired you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of women reclaiming their power, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.